So Caitlin Clark is I'm not going to say going to be traded, but the odds of Caitlin Clark playing out her entire rookie deal for the Indiana Fever are less than even. There's a greater than 50-50 chance that Caitlin Clark is traded before the end of her rookie deal. And that sounds crazy, but it isn't. A lot of people are talking about, they'll obviously choose Caitlin Clark over Stephanie White. It's not choosing Caitlin Clark over Stephanie White. This is a team that is put together to succeed for Stephanie White coaching without Caitlin Clark. And we said this, everybody said this.
The breaking point has finally arrived for Stephanie White, and the resulting fallout is sending shockwaves throughout the WNBA. An uncomfortable silence fills the locker room because everyone is well aware of the harsh reality that nobody wants to voice out loud. The era of Caitlin Clark in Indiana isn't just experiencing growing pains. It is effectively finished before it ever truly had a chance to begin. Many assumed this was simply a difficult rebuilding phase, but it has deteriorated into a complete organizational collapse that can only conclude one way. The connection between the superstar player and the head coach hasn't just been strained, it has been entirely destroyed. What was supposed to be a historic partnership has instead devolved into a bitter power struggle that the franchise cannot possibly survive in its current form.
Players playing their B game, and your team doesn't get good shots. It's not going to work because Stephanie White has a way she wants her team to play. That whole thing is under her assumption that she's going to change Caitlin Clark. And Stephanie White, from the second she set foot in the Fever, did not like Caitlin Clark, the player. She said, okay, Caitlin Clark's easy to game plan against, so my job is to make it harder to game plan against her. And I'm like, okay. But instead, she's overcorrected now, and Caitlin Clark is no longer...
The likelihood of Caitlin Clark actually playing out her entire rookie contract with the Indiana Fever has officially dropped below 50%. It sounds completely radical to suggest trading a generational talent who fundamentally transformed the financial landscape of women's basketball, but the internal metrics are practically demanding a split. This is no longer just a collection of fan theories or clickbait rumors. It is a harsh mathematical reality based directly on how this specific roster is failing on the court. The front office is beginning to realize they are trapped in a corner where the harder they try to correct the issues, the worse the team chemistry becomes. At this point, we are looking at a greater than even chance that Clark will be wearing a completely different uniform before her initial contract reaches its end. The countdown to a massive blockbuster trade has officially begun.
There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. The earlier you make the choice, you can salvage this season. There's a potential. You can salvage this season in two ways. You have two ways to salvage this season. You can salvage the season by trading Caitlin Clark or by getting rid of every single thing. If you don't trade Caitlin Clark, let's be real. Even if Stephanie White is gone, you appoint the greatest coach in the world. This team's not equipped to win. They're just not. To win, if you don't trade Caitlin Clark, you would have to literally, this is what you would have to give up. You would have to give up,
The most startling revelation in this situation is that the Indiana Fever intentionally constructed a roster meant to function without Caitlin Clark, rather than alongside her. Every single roster decision made over the past 2 seasons was designed to build a unified, average squad that fits neatly into a conventional coaching philosophy. There are no elite perimeter shooters to create space for her signature passes, no dominant rim protectors to make up for her defensive shortcomings, and no fast runners to track down her full-court lobs. Instead, the floor is congested with players who are decent at everything but truly spectacular at nothing. It is the equivalent of purchasing a Ferrari and then forcing it to navigate a muddy swamp. The actual infrastructure required to maximize a special talent like Clark simply does not exist in Indiana.
Sophie Cunningham, Lexi Hull. Maybe you keep Sophie. You have to get rid of one of Sophie or Lexi Hull. Lexi's on a near untradeable contract, and you have to get rid of Monique Billings. You have to potentially give up assets to get rid of them. You have to find a way to get off Kelsey Mitchell because they're not going to work. It is one of these weird things where if you have to start from scratch. If you want to build through Caitlin, you have to start from scratch and realize that you fucked up bad. You fucked up bad, and that every decision has been made since the firing of Christy Sides, which was the right decision, by the way. But every decision made by the team since the firing of Christie sides outside of hardship players, which were, by the way, replaced.
The on-court tension between Caitlin Clark and Kelsey Mitchell has escalated to an unbearable level as both guards fight for the exact same space. Instead of Clark serving as the primary playmaker and setting Mitchell up for high-percentage baskets, the dynamic has turned into a desperate battle over who can force up the most shots. Both athletes are currently stuck playing well below their potential because the system forces them to compete with each other rather than collaborate. Mitchell is a natural scorer who prefers to hunt for her own looks, while Clark is routinely forced into off-ball roles that completely erase her greatest strengths. When you feature two elite guards playing entirely out of rhythm and constantly battling for touches, the collective offense grinds to a painful, inefficient halt.
Have never won a best-of-5 series against Atlanta. I'm just putting it out there. They were never going to win best-of-5. A shorter series meant that you could have an upset. But you make the playoffs, you lose in the first round. What teams can potentially trade for Caitlin? Everyone says the Liberty. The Liberty cannot trade for Caitlin. You know what? The Liberty might be able to. So, short term, BLH apparently, from rumblings, is that she's not particularly happy because she can't, because they're not going to offer a big contract next year. BLH, Pauline Astier, and Satu.
Stephanie White made it perfectly clear from the exact moment she returned to Indiana that she was not a fan of Caitlin Clark's specific brand of basketball. She openly stated that Clark was far too easy for opponents to game plan against, asserting that her job was to make the superstar much tougher to contain. However, her method for making Clark tougher to stop centers on taking the basketball out of her hands and forcing her into a rigid old-school style of play. White has overcorrected so aggressively that the most electric playmaker in the history of college basketball has been reduced to a secondary spectator. It is a fundamental clash of basketball philosophies, where the head coach demands absolute control and the star player requires total creative freedom.
They're going to lose a bunch of games. There is no way, unless Caitlin goes rogue, that fans are going to keep caring. You've already made your money. Caitlin's not as valuable as she is money-wise. You can't get people to show up to home games. You don't make money off your jersey sales. Your jersey sales that people were buying for Caitlin Clark, that goes to the whole league. You don't make money off as much money off gate revenue. It's at the stage now where there's so few people showing up to games. If you're losing if you're selling 3,000, 4,000 below capacity, your arena's probably working at a loss if you're opening up the whole arena. So your arena.
Under Stephanie White's new leadership, Caitlin Clark's total impact on any given game has been narrowed down to whether her shots happen to be falling. In the past, Clark could put together a spectacular performance even on off-shooting nights because her gravity and passing dictated every single movement on the floor. Now, that kind of impact is physically impossible because the system prevents her from acting as the primary engine of the offense. If she isn't converting highly difficult, heavily contested jumpers, she is essentially viewed as a net negative in the eyes of White. We have witnessed brief glimpses of brilliance throughout the season, but those moments only occur when Clark chooses to tune out the coaching staff and play her own brand of basketball. The current system is built to suppress the exact qualities that make her special.
It's too far gone. It is absolutely it's too far gone. Caitlin Clark is not a good offensive player in Stephanie White's system. And I'm sorry, in a switch old school, switch everything, you're responsible for your man, fuck help side defense system that Stephanie White's running. Caitlin's not a good enough defender. And especially she's not a good enough defender when her other guards are Kelsey Mitchell and Lexi Hull, who are in fact worse point of attack defenders than her. They are worse isolation defenders than her. So she is the best of the three of them, which is a problem.
The Fever are currently staring down a brutal ultimatum that will shape the direction of the franchise for the next 10 years. They must either trade Caitlin Clark or fire every single person currently working in the building. There is no middle ground left to negotiate because the dysfunction has spread entirely through the coaching staff and the front office. If they choose to keep Clark, they must come to terms with the fact that every major decision made since the dismissal of Christie sides has been a total disaster. They would have to part ways with the management duo of Amber Cox and Kelly Crosskop, both of whom are deeply tied to Stephanie White's organizational vision. Keeping their star player means openly admitting that the franchise's entire strategy for the past 12 months was a complete
Clark might be a net negative in Stephanie White's system. The only times we see positive Caitlin Clark is when she goes rogue, which Stephanie White clearly has not been happy about. She's not sabotaging a team in the way that she's trying to lose games by doing it. We can hear in press conferences, when Caitlin goes berserk in games, she's never happy. Why? Because she's gone rogue. Anytime Caitlin goes berserk in a game, she has gone rogue. She's done the opposite of what Stephanie White wants. This is a match made in hell, and the problem is that the Fever are too far in to fix it by just...
If the organization refuses to part ways with Stephanie White, then the only logical option left is to move Caitlin Clark while her trade value remains at an all-time high. By trading her at this moment, the Fever could actually provide White with the gritty, defensively focused roster that she so clearly desires. They could acquire a haul of assets who fit a switch-heavy defensive scheme and a balanced, slower-paced offensive style. It would be a decision that prioritizes a coach's ego over a player's generational talent, but at least the squad would possess a unified identity once again. Right now, they exist as a hybrid monster that can't win basketball games and can't keep their fanbase happy because the internal friction is incredibly obvious to everyone. The list of current players who would need to be cleared out to make a Clark-centered system actually function is both staggering and incredibly expensive. You would have to find a path to move on from Kelsey Mitchell, who does not fit the ideal timeline or the specific playing style required to maximize Clark's elite skills. You would likely have to trade away Sophie Cunningham or Lexi Hull, even though Hull is on a contract that is notoriously difficult to move. Then there is Monique Billings and the rest of the veteran group that was brought in to offer stability, but has instead only caused stagnation. The Fever essentially have to choose between a complete roster teardown or a single blockbuster trade that sends their superstar to a brand new city. The rumors regarding a potential trade to the New York Liberty are beginning to gain serious traction as the financial pieces start to line up. Imagine a massive deal where New York sends out a package featuring players like Satu Sabali and Pauline Estier just to secure Clark. While the Liberty are already a championship powerhouse, the marketing potential of placing Clark in the largest media market in the world is simply too massive to ignore. There are quiet whispers that even the premier stars in New York aren't entirely satisfied with current contract projections, making a massive roster shakeup more realistic than ever. It would easily become the biggest trade in the history of women's professional sports. Chicago is another landing spot that keeps surfacing in front office circles, even if it is a destination that Caitlin Clark herself might deeply dislike. The Sky possess the necessary assets and draft picks to assemble a highly compelling offer, potentially involving multiple first-round selections and elite young talent like Camila Cardoso. Balancing the salaries would be an absolute nightmare, but for a player of Clark's historic caliber, teams are fully prepared to gut their future assets. The real issue is that the Fever have lost all of their leverage because the rest of the league can easily see how dysfunctional the entire situation has become. Every general manager in the WNBA knows that Indiana is completely backed into a corner, and they are simply waiting to pounce on the remains of the roster. The upcoming expansion franchises in Toronto and Portland are also looming in the background as realistic landing spots for an unhappy superstar. A brand new franchise would willingly give up everything to secure Caitlin Clark as their day one face, instantly providing a level of global branding that Indiana has failed to successfully capitalize on. If the Fever hesitate for too long, they run the real risk of Clark walking away in free agency for absolutely nothing the moment her rookie constraints expire. She is a maverick point guard who isn't about to sit around for 6 years while a coach attempts to transform her into a basic role player. The clock is actively ticking, and the expansion draft might just provide the perfect exit strategy for everyone involved. There is also a massive financial myth surrounding the Fever right now that is starting to fall apart behind closed doors. While the public assumes the franchise is swimming in cash because of Clark, the reality of WNBA economics is far more unforgiving for individual teams. The revenue generated from jersey sales actually goes directly to the league as a whole, rather than staying exclusively with the Indiana Fever. Furthermore, the massive arena attendance figures from early on in the season are starting to decline as the team keeps losing and looking utterly miserable on the court. If you aren't consistently selling out the upper bowl, operating a massive arena turns into a heavy financial burden rather than a guaranteed gold mine. The monetary justification for keeping her is quickly vanishing. The Fever are getting dangerously close to blocking off the upper tiers of their stadium because local fan interest is cratering. When you are dropping games by 20 points and your premier star looks like she would rather be anywhere else in the world, casual fans simply stop showing up. The arena is reportedly operating at a distinct financial loss during certain home stretches because the overhead costs of running a full stadium easily outweigh the dwindling ticket sales. This is precisely why organizations like the Sparks choose not to open up their entire venues for every single home game. Without the Caitlin Clark magic actually translating into visible wins, the financial incentive to keep her in a hostile work environment completely evaporates. Stephanie White's defensive system acts as the ultimate black hole for a player like Caitlin Clark, who naturally struggles with lateral quickness. White firmly insists on an old-school, switch-everything defensive game plan where every single player is entirely responsible for their own matchup, offering very little help-side support. Clark is a mediocre defender even on her absolute best days, and being left stranded on an island against the premier guards in the league is exposing her weaknesses every single night. To make matters worse, her backcourt partners like Kelsey Mitchell and Lexi Hull are actually even worse isolation defenders than she is. This creates a deep defensive rot where the perimeter is constantly broken down, leading to effortless baskets for the opposition. The most damning proof of this internal rift is that the only time we see the authentic Caitlin Clark is when she goes completely rogue on the floor. Every single time she puts together a major scoring burst or delivers a highlight reel sequence, it happens entirely outside of the specific plays Stephanie White is calling from the sidelines. You can watch the coaching staff during these exact moments. They aren't cheering and they aren't celebrating. They are visibly frustrated because their superstar is deviating from the system they worked so incredibly hard to put in place. It is a match made in hell, where the marquee player's success is actually viewed as a direct defiance of the coach's authority. That is a professional relationship that can never truly be repaired. Even during post-game press conferences, the tension is so incredibly thick you could cut it with a knife. Stephanie White rarely offers praise for Clark's individual brilliance, choosing instead to focus heavily on team basketball and defensive rotations even after Clark pours in 30 points. It functions as a passive-aggressive way of signaling to the world that she does not value what Clark brings to the table unless it is executed her way. Clark herself has started to look completely checked out, offering brief answers and entirely avoiding eye contact with the coaching staff. When a player of her massive stature completely gives up on leadership, the season is effectively over. The locker room has fractured into divided camps consisting of the coaches, standard players, and staunch Clark supporters. The drafting of Kate Martin was the ultimate signal that the Fever were already searching for an escape route from the Caitlin Clark business. Many league insiders firmly believe Martin was brought in specifically to serve as the replacement point guard who would actually execute Stephanie White's exact vision. Raven Johnson is a player who will strictly stick to the script and focus heavily on defense, which is precisely what White values in a floor general. It seemingly does not matter to the coaching staff that opposing defenses don't even bother to guard Raven, creating a constant 4-on-5 scenario on the offensive end. They would honestly rather play at a distinct disadvantage with a player they can control than at an advantage with a superstar they cannot. The salary cap situation for the upcoming season serves as the final nail in the coffin for this roster's current setup. The Fever are already committed to over $1.5 million for players like Aaliyah Boston, Lexi Hull, and Monique Billings. When you factor in the very real potential for a Supermax extension, the franchise might not even possess the financial flexibility to retain Clark and construct a winning roster around her. They are financially paralyzed by poor contracts and average talent that they simply cannot trade away. This transforms a potential trade from a personal choice into an absolute financial necessity to avoid remaining the worst team in the league for the next 5 years while paying luxury tax premiums. If the Indiana Fever want to rescue any piece of their future, they must act decisively before the upcoming trade deadline or the next draft. Every single game that Clark logs in this highly restrictive system actively lowers her overall trade value, as rival franchises witness her growing frustration and see her shooting percentages decline. Right now, she remains an absolute goldmine of potential for a coach who actually understands how to utilize her unique skills. However, if she spends another full year being suppressed by Stephanie White, she will inevitably become just another tragic what-if story in sports history. The organization is currently sitting directly on a ticking time bomb, and the solitary way to defuse it is to ship her to a franchise that actually wants to win playing her style. Looking back at the trade discussions from 6 months ago, Clark's value was virtually immeasurable, demanding multiple first-round draft picks and elite all-star talent. Now, rival general managers are starting to lowball the Fever because they recognize exactly how desperate this entire situation has become. They are fully aware that Indiana cannot keep her, and they know the team cannot keep Stephanie White in the exact same room anymore. The leverage has swung entirely to the buyers, and the Fever might ultimately have to settle for a trade package that is far less than what they easily could have secured over the summer. It stands as a masterclass in exactly how to ruin the greatest asset in the history of a sports franchise through pure ego and stubbornness. Ultimately, a clean trade would be the absolute best thing that ever happened to Caitlin Clark's professional career. She fully deserves to play in an offensive system that celebrates her elite court vision and actively encourages her to take the creative risks that made her a household name. Whether that future unfolds in New York, Chicago, or a brand new expansion market, she desperately needs a fresh start far away from the toxic environment brewing in Indiana. Stephanie White will finally get her wish of leading a roster full of system players who will never go rogue, and Clark will get her wish of actually being permitted to play basketball freely again. The divorce is undeniably coming, and it is going to stand as the most unbelievable moment in WNBA history. The simple reality is that certain stars and certain coaches function exactly like oil and water. No matter how vigorously you stir, they will never truly mix. The Indiana Fever attempted to force a generational talent into a box that was far too small for her, and they are about to pay the ultimate price for that mistake. Fans will forever look back on this brief era as a massive missed opportunity to construct a legendary dynasty. Instead, they will be left with a head coach who excels at transforming bad teams into thoroughly mediocre ones, while the greatest shooter on the planet wins world championships somewhere else. A trade is no longer just a mere possibility at this point. It is the only remaining way to stop the bleeding.